I did it. 710 pages later. Say hi, Ginger. She's here to drive me insane. The least you could do is say hello. Right? No? Okay. All right, everyone. So I'm reading, or I read Perdido Street Station. Just to tell you a little about the book. It's written by Chana Miéville, published in 2000. Other books that he's written is King Rat, Scar, and he co-wrote the Book of Elsewhere in 2024 with Keanu Reeves. I'm reading this as part of my interview with the Vampire Inspired Readathon. The prompt is Lestat has a contentious relationship with a higher power. So read a book with sacrilegious consequences. This book is sci-fi, noir, specifically more steampunk, cosmic horror, because this was an absolute horror show to read. So this takes place in New Crobuzon, and this is an area that has like political corruption. It's not looking good in New Crobuzon. It's filthy. People aren't treated like they're equals. The government and militia are like doing some crazy stuff, as well as there's like very rich gangsters running around. So there's just a lot to chew on of the 710 pages. And there's like a whole ensemble uh, in this book, but I'm going to just focus on a few, or else this is going to be very, very long. So the characters that I would like to focus on are Lynn and Isaac. They're in a relationship. Isaac's human. Lynn is like a half beetle, half woman. And so they're in a relationship. Isaac decides to take this money and agree with this guy, Yag, who's Gerudo, which is half a bird person or whatnot, because Yag wants his wings back. He doesn't have wings, and Isaac is a scientist, and so he agrees that he'd help him out, that maybe he could crack a particular theory and make it a reality so that Yag could then fly again. Underpinning that is that Yag tells Isaac that the reason why he doesn't have his wings is because they were taken from him because he committed a crime, and he was convicted of committing what is it called, choice theft. And I'll get back to it in a second, but that's all we know. And so Isaac agrees. And so with his girlfriend Lynn, we follow someone that is an artist that has a brutal backstory, and they agree to an artistic uh, commerce relationship where I feel like the author's really talking about like art and commerce and IP. And so they both have made deals that are like not good. They have like nefarious undertones basically to their story. And it goes from there. But it, again, this is like so, I'm trying to like boil it down because there's a lot that goes on in here between like political and humanitarian strife. And on top of it, you're having these two characters in a relationship that it's not necessarily, it might not necessarily be so that it's illegal or anything, but their relationship is controversial. Let's say that. So they don't share that they're in a relationship with anyone. So what worked with me was like the political conversations, the social, humanitarian conversations that are going on. The style of the writing is like there's a lot of verbose prose. I hope I'm saying that right. It's sort of, and so I don't know if everyone will gel with that. I liked it. I learned a lot of new words, and I've forgotten a lot of new words. So there was just a lot going on. What didn't really work for me is that, yes, this is 710 pages. And because I'm under a time constraint, sometimes it felt like when I was reading through this that it just felt like it dragged at some points. And because I, I almost wanted us to just focus on the stories that I'm focusing on talking about rather than everything else because it's just so vast, so broad, so many things are going on, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, what am I supposed to pay attention to here, right? And so that's kind of like my only critique is that it's so meandering. But when this came out in 2000, I think a lot of people loved it, and it definitely built a sci-fi world that people can cosplay and have a lot of fun discussions about what the author's trying to say politically in this world. And that's what sci-fi does really well, I think. Um, Before I continue, I will say that I watched an interview with the author, and he happened to mention his influences. That yes, there are plenty of sci-fi influences, but there's also classic literature that influenced the author as well. And someone that stuck out to me, which we'll talk about later, is Octavia E. Butler. And I thought that was important to note. I've only read like a couple of books by Octavia Butler, and I have a whole handful on my shelf that I need to read. Because of the way that Butler uses sci-fi to have social commentary, and I felt when I was reading his book, because of what I already figured out what's going on with Yag right away, I figured that was like the overall conversation that the author was trying to have, and that's something that Butler did really well in her work. So I kind of felt like I was already making that connection when I was reading his work before I even saw the interview and found out that Butler was one of his influences. So just to dig in from there, the book really trying to like become privy to the themes, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to talk about it. So maybe I'll do that through character. So with Lynn, or like a character like Yag, they are creatures from like different cultural upbringings. And that's something that stands out is that the humans are more like individualistic, and the creatures that are not human tend to be more like from collectivist group thinks. Not that one is one way or the other, but the author really carves out a way that there are like cultural differences and misunderstandings, and that comes up quite a bit. So with Lynn, I would say she grew up in a particular way of thinking that was not advantageous to her, but also very hurtful, especially specific to her family. There's more of like a cult-like think more than a group think, that she had to gather the strength to break away from, as where like when they go and they try to get to know Lynn and Isaac go on a trip to talk to some of the Garuda to figure out what's going on with Yag. There's like a big like cultural misunderstanding, and that really shows the individualism of Isaac, the classism. I want to say it kind of reminds me of like racism in a way, the way that they're tackling it. Although I feel like that's too. I think I'm boiling it down too much, and that would be a disservice. But there's definitely like some ways that Isaac comes from the scientific community and the way he talks to others that he's researching that kind of reminds me of some of the like elitist like colonial and individualistic think that really stuck out to me. And so we have someone like Lynn who is trying to find another place to live where she's a part of a minority group as a refuge, but then and in doing so, she becomes alienated and othered. And so that's something that really sticks out in New Chromosome when there's so many when there's so much diversity, but like when humans are the majority, I suppose. There's also a discussion about like through Isaac about science and the power one could hold with the scientific knowledge, and where do that like ethics lie in that. Just because someone can do something doesn't mean that they should. So there's a really a deep, complicated conversation going on through his character about what the science community is capable of, and should they really be messing should science really be messing with nature in the way that it is. And in fact, there's like a whole group of people, and they're called remade, and that means like someone could be punished, and in doing so their body will be altered. So there's a lot of like there's body horror elements. That's what that really reminded me of. And so from there we have like, I guess through both characters, but then broadly, as we get to know the world more, there's like systemic corruption and oppression, and there's like civil unrest going on. Um, and they're like navigating New Chromosome with all this going on. Um, and it's just like a very dangerous place to be, but I almost feel like it almost feels like a Western in that sense of just like the wild west. People are just doing like there's like it's just a boundless existence, but like not in a good way, because no one's really looking out for each other. And even deeper still, getting into like uh, the complicated like relationship with power and science is like this really deep dive through both characters, through Lynn and Isaac, about like obsession, like artistic obsession, scientific obsession. And in with Lynn, she agrees to something that I felt like was really tapping into like intellectual property when it comes to being an artist, and how much of yourself are you willing to give up? How much of yourself are you willing to lose? What dangerous path are you willing to put yourself in the name of your art? And so these are like Isaac goes down one rabbit hole when it comes to science, and then goes into another, but in like into herself. Um, that's like very scary and dangerous, and she's taking money from this very rich person, and she I feel like she's just stepped herself into the lion's den, but I think they both have in their own ways. And I don't want to circle too much back to the remade, but there is a sense between what Lynn is doing through her artistic endeavor, what's happening to the remade creatures, and how Isaac is trying to help Yag fly again. That there is this conversation about like transformation um, going on, and it's not necessarily like a commentary on evolution, but more like the monsters that we become, and also what the world makes us. So that I found really interesting. So this book is just like you go on and on. It's so deep, and the author's kind of everywhere in a way that I really enjoyed. If that makes any sense, I really feel like he's just getting everything all his thoughts and feelings out in this book on a variety of subjects. And actually, when I was reading this, another book I thought about that I don't have with me now, but it's called Womb City. And I think I read it last year or the year before. It came out very recently. And that was a book that was sci-fi, that was also not 700 pages, but there was just a lot going on in it. And I wanted that book to be broken up into like a trilogy because I think it would have worked better. And I almost feel this way about uh Perdido Street Station. I almost wish this was at least broken up into two books. Although I don't know how you would expand it or streamline it. But it's just there's just a lot going on. And again, I just keep thinking about those meandering pieces of the book that really stuck out to me. I'm trying to think about what else I could say before I spoil it. I try not to spoil anything too much. There's quite a bit to tackle, and it's 710 pages, which I'm just going to keep repeating. And so it's definitely worth your while reading, but I wouldn't make it like a priority read being that long. Or I would highly suggest you read it along something else where you kind of like give it a rest at times and step away, because it's a lot. There's a lot going on. I'm trying to think about what I should say before I move on. I think that's it for my review, or just kind of like non-spoiler discussion about the book. I am going to have a spoiler discussion that I'm actually just getting in bed in my 3 questions that are related to Interview the Vampire. So just know now, spoilers abound. This is like a very unique situation because of the contents of the books, but also look up the trigger warnings for this book before you watch the rest of my discussion. So feel free to step away, look that up, and then come back, because I'm gonna have to go there. There's no way to avoid the conversation anymore. All right, so my 3 questions for my Interview the Vampire Inspired Readathon is: 1, why does Lestat have this book on their shelf? To bring that up, I'm going to have to discuss the Vampire Chronicles as a whole, or what I've read so far. So there is something that's going on in China Miéville's work that, again, reminded me of Octavia E. Butler and also Anne Rice's work, and something that all the authors are discussing, and that is consent. With Interview the Vampire, there's this like very controversial dynamic between Louis and Claudia. And then we have the Vampire Lestat, where think about the way that Lestat was changed into a vampire. I'll say that. And that whole experience for an author that doesn't necessarily write explicit sex, like there's like an eroticism to the way that she writes, like the vampire blood exchange that is erotic. And then we have Queen of the Damned, where there's definitely a lot of non-consensual things happening here. And the same thing with Mimnock the Devil. There's just some very like odd exchanges that felt confusing for me in an explicit way. And more directly in the next 2 books I'm going to mention, which is Tale of the Body Thief. We're following Lestat, and there's some essay in here, as well as the whole damn book of the Vampire Mind is basically essay. So that's something that's like really explored in Anne Rice's work, but also in a book like Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. And there's also, I don't have it, I have Lilith's Brood. I already read it and I gave it to someone. So I have Octavia's Brood just as a placement, but really I'm talking about Lilith's Brood, because that there's definitely some non-consensual things going on in there. And then there's like a controversial discussion in Fledgling, also by Octavia Butler, that, if I remember correctly, it's not that it's considered non-consensual. It's just the fact that it reminded me of Anne Rice's first book, Interview the Vampire, or the first book in the Chronicles, and like the controversial dynamics with Claudia the vampire and the other people in adult bodies. I'll say that. And so what really stuck out to me is a conversation thematically, actually from the beginning to the very end, in China Miéville's Perdido Street Station. One thing, once again, this is a spoiler talk from now on, is what happens to Lynn when she grew up, which is that it wasn't just a part of her culture. It felt like it was more part of like the cult that she was in, being raised in with her family. And that is, I guess, in the insect culture, men would take advantage of women, and that's kind of like their place. And it's specific with like insects, that when they engage in like explicit acts, it's not for pleasure, it's to procreate and to be used. And so she's a character that grew up with a particular like cultural norm, and had to break away and realize, oh, that's not normal, and break away. So that's why it's like another layer of what's so unique and precious to her relationship with Isaac is because she's engaging in something like with someone that she doesn't even really know how. They're like trying to figure each other out. And there's like this freedom and agency she has with Isaac because um they're like in a relationship where they're equals to each other. They both have equal obsessive jobs in things. And also it's consensual and it's something that she enjoys and wants to do. And the same thing for Isaac. And so that's like really important to her character. And you just, at least for me, I felt like she's like my favorite character, and I loved learning about her. I love that she uh, is using her art, and um it feels like this domestic protest to everything that she's been through in a way. Art is something that she creates, and no one has control of it over it until she engages with this uh, new employer, right? Which starts to blur the lines there. And so throughout the book, I felt like there's a conversation about consent going on. And that even goes on with Yag, who says that he had his wings stripped because he committed the crime of like choice theft. Which, as soon as I heard choice theft, to me, I already figured out what had happened, which is that he SA'd someone. I didn't need the author to spell it out. Just hearing choice theft, I already figured it out. He doesn't have his wings. And again, I think that was my only frustration with Isaac, is that like as soon as I read that, I already knew what was going on with him. And so I feel like that's an important conversation going on throughout the book. And I really appreciated the use of the word choice theft. And the author brings it up again when the survivor of this choice theft confronts Isaac and says, "Hey, please don't help this guy. This is what he did to me." And I feel like the use of choice theft and the conversation around that is, we're calling it choice theft because um, the survivor is not, there should be no shame or guilt or something, anything placed on the survivor. No, this is the judgment and the guilt of the perpetrator. And so he committed choice theft. It's on him. And so I really appreciated like the author's discussion about how the verbiage is uses around SA and like removing shame from a survivor and what they may feel, and actually what society puts on them, and saying, okay, let me explain to you who it really needs to be placed on. I thought that was like such a beautiful thought-provoking choice. And that's something I'm generally going to take with me. But I would also say, because of this is on the LESTAT'S shelf, I think that that's a big point of why it's on his shelf, is because he is a monster. In this Gothic literature, they're all monsters. And I feel like he is someone that starts out in some ways, or sees himself as like a victim, and then like it flips, and then he becomes a monster. He becomes like the villain in a lot of senses, even though we go on to other books and we follow him as a protagonist. And I think that could be confusing for some readers. I think just because someone's, not everyone, but some people will read like a protagonist and think that we don't necessarily need to agree with everything that they do or like them or see them as like the hero. They could also be a villain. And so I just think that when Lestat reads Perdido Street Station, he can relate to, I think he really relates to Lynn. I think he really relates to Lynn. All right. So also, speaking of Lynn, the second question is, did this book potentially recontextualize a character, a Lestat, for me? Yes. And that is, again, through Lynn. She is someone that does not fit into like societal norms within her own culture. And then she goes to New Chromosome, and she doesn't she has to navigate her existence very carefully there as well, and hide her relationship with Isaac. They just want to be careful because they don't want to be they're just worried about like discrimination. And I think that her artistic freedom is where she can let a lot out, and that's something that Lestat could relate to because he's been a theater actor, and in season 3 we're going to see him being this rock star. And I feel like it's actually like his performances in a way through the theatrical version of himself that really hurts him in a way from being seen, but it's also probably a time that he feels like the most seen. And I feel that same way about his connection and recontextualizing him with Lynn, is that I just feel like season 3 is going to be like documentary style, and it's going to be he's repeating something that Louis did right in the first 2 seasons. Louis is heavily editorializing his story, how he thinks he wants to be perceived, and we're going to get that from Lestat in a way as well. He's going to say, no, we're going to do documentary, and let me tell you my true story. But even then, there's going to be a level performance because there's just parts of what he's done, what he's experienced that he just doesn't really want to tap into. And so that's really what's going to stick out to me as far as like recontextualizing the character. And lastly, what book would I recommend Lestat? You know what? This Lestat. You know what his problem is that there's so much. He has people in his life that really adore him, and there's a lot of self. You know, if you've seen the trailer, he's already saying that he's already calling himself a god. Okay, so the amount of ego on him is massive. And so I think sometimes when people are so wrapped up in themselves, or have too much time to think about themselves, that they need to do like the opposite and just to like focus on others. So I would really like if he read Microactivism, How You Can Make a Difference in the World Without a Bullhorn, Small Action, Big Results. And this is by Kari L. Williams. And so I would just want Lestat to not focus so much on himself or to obsess over whatever you think is a problem, or the real problem, or the big problem, or the little problem, or the big problem, and just think about like day to day, what can he manage, what small things can he do to contribute outside of his existence, because I think that would help him selfishly. And another version of being selfish is just to help others and like take one's mind off oneself. And so if you got this far, thank you for participating in my interview with the Vampire Inspired Readathon. I cannot believe I got through reading the books that I have. Coming up on my channel on the 20th, so I'm just days away from discussing, what am I discussing? Black Punk Now. So this is an anthology, and one of my favorite authors is a focus in here. On top of that, I'm going to be hopping on to Elaine's channel later on this month on one of the February's on a Saturday. I'll be popping on over to discuss the Vampire Armand, so keep a lookout for that. I know I did say there's so many books in the Chronicles. I was going to have a discussion on myself, but I feel like it's getting away from me, so I am going to do it, but I think I might collectively talk about quite a few books in the context of an adaptation. So look out for that as well. I'm getting there. I'm moving as slow as molasses, but I'm getting there. All right, everyone. I love you lots. Just remember, life is chaos. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and read more books. Bye.